Hello everybody and welcome back. I'm Deborah Hatswell and you're tuned into BBR Cryptid and Paranormal Investigations. Thank you for joining me and I really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you are well and enjoying your day. Strange animal mutilations in Todmorden, UFOs, police abductions and a mystery substance not yet known to mankind. Todmorden is a small town. It's set in the hills of West Yorkshire, just on the border with Lancashire. It's a beautiful place to visit, a place of small villages and farms, with many natural water sources, woodlands and rolling hills. It's also known as the UFO capital of the North. Within this small village there are a number of the strangest reports. A police officer who was abducted whilst on duty, and a gentleman found on top of a coal heap with no signs of injury. On his clothes was a substance not yet known to man. And this week, I received a set of photographs from the Gaddings Dam area of Todmorden, and they were sent to me by a gentleman named Albert Tyas. He's local to the area, and he was out walking when he came across a very strange animal kill. Now, the gentleman contacted me by email and he sent them images across. And thankfully, because of his quick thinking, there are a number of images taken from all angles. The images show a very young calf with no ears or lips, laying on the ground as if dropped from above. The genitals are gone, and so is the anus area. The calf was found laying in a field of sheep. Now, I'm unsure if this is unusual practice for farmers or if the calf was taken and returned and left in the wrong place, perhaps. This kill has all the classic signs of animal mutilation. Notice the very precise clean cuts. There are no signs of attack or a chase of any kind. The ground is far too clean for this to be a dog or a cat kill. It doesn't fit with the classic signs of any normal beast here in the UK. And as I said, to me, it looks as if the calf has been dropped from above and deposited in the wrong field, maybe. But that's just my opinion and only speculation. If you listen to this on the podcast or YouTube, there is a link provided in the description below so that you can see the full set of images. Now, over the years of studying possible canine and cat kills, I find the wounds to be very different. A dog will tear at the soft tissue. There's usually signs of paw and claw marks on the ground, and sometimes on the kill. Dogs are messy and they'll pull and drag at the carcass. A cat will leave signs of teeth marks on the neck, and it'll drag the carcass off and store it somewhere away from other predators, usually up in a tree or in thick grass. They also usually eat the soft belly parts or the back end first. On this kill, I see only laser-like cuts. The ears, lips and sexual organs have all been removed. There are no signs of vehicle or tractor tracks. In fact, the scene is pristine. After sharing the images of the calf mutilation at Todmorden, I was contacted by a gentleman who stated, "I saw a sheep that looked exactly the same as that calf at Healy Dell Nature Reserve. There was no blood or anything on the ground or any obvious signs of a struggle. The sheep also had a perfectly cut sphere cut into its side. There was no blood around the wound. The cut was the size of a tennis ball. It looked like when you use one of those melon ballers. Very strange, as if the flesh had been scooped in some way." So today I contacted Mr. Colin Lyle of the Todmorden UFO group, and I passed on the contact details for Mr. Tyas and all of the images that he'd sent over. Colin lives close to the area and he can investigate to see if the calf is still in the field. If so, it would be worth getting samples and swabs from the wounds, the ground around the calf, and of course the calf itself. David Caton is also investigating the case as he has a vast knowledge of cattle mutilations and UFO events all across the UK. The name Todmorden translates in Old Germanic as death, murder. So it should not be a surprise so many strange happenings take place here. I mentioned the strange case of Alan Godfrey, who was the on-duty police officer when he had some very strange experiences happen to him. There's also the case of Zygmunt Adamski, one that's fascinated me for years. He was found on top of a heap of coal after vanishing for 5 days. Both cases happened in the 1980s, and there have been other reports of strange phenomena from the area that have surfaced over the ensuing decades. The 56-year-old miner Zygmunt Adamski went missing from his home in the nearby town of Tingley. Mr. Adamski, who was employed at the local mine, left his house where he lived on June the 6th, 1980, to walk to the local shops. Sadly, he was never seen alive again. 5 short days later, Mr. Adamski's body was found on top of a 10-foot high pile of coal by a yard worker named Trevor Park in Todmorden, 20 miles away from where he last went missing. There were many mysterious circumstances around the discovery of Mr. Adamski's body. One of the strange things was that Mr. Adamski was wearing a suit, and that suit was buttoned up wrong. Also, his shirt was wrong, his wallet and watch were missing. Mr. Adamski had been missing for 5 days when he was found, yet he only had 1 day's growth of beard on his chin. His hair had been messily cut short, and his head, neck and shoulders were covered in burn marks. On examination, it was realised Mr. Adamski's burns were coated in a strange ointment or substance that scientists could not identify at the time or since. There were no injuries to indicate how he had died, other than the burn marks, but they were not severe enough to have caused his death. When he was found, his eyes were open, and his face showed an expression of pure terror, suggesting that he'd been scared to death in some way. Now, no one could explain where Mr. Adamski had been for the 5 days he was missing, or how his body had found its way to the top of a large pile of coal. What was strange was the ointment that was covering the burns. Why he only had 1 day of beard growth nobody could explain. Or how did he die? James Turnbull, the coroner assigned to the case, stated that this was the biggest mystery of his career. There's never been a reasonable explanation for what happened to Mr. Adamski, and the case remains open to this day. Now, when Trevor Park came upon the body of Mr. Adamski, the local police were called, of course. The policeman who attended the incident at the coal yard when Mr. Adamski's body was found was named Alan Godfrey. Mr. Godfrey went on to have a very strange set of events happen not too long after attending the scene. 5 or 6 months later, depending on which report you listen to, Mr. Godfrey had his own otherworldly experience less than a mile from the coal yard. He'd been on duty at the time and trying to locate some loose cattle when he saw what he described as a flying saucer on Burnley Road. He quickly sketched the object that he saw hovering above the ground and then headed back to the local police station to report it. Later noticing that he'd lost 15-30 minutes of time. Under hypnosis, Mr. Godfrey spoke about being abducted by a UFO. He was given a physical examination by 2 beings. His story made the news all around the world, prompting UFO researchers to rush to West Yorkshire in search of evidence. There is a monthly meeting that's held in the local pub where people share their experiences with others, and it's one I attend sometimes. It's at the Golden Lion there if you ever fancy going. Since then, there have been many reports of strange lights in the sky over Todmorden and the surrounding moors. Other famous UFO sightings in Yorkshire include objects spotted in the sky over Rothwell, a triangular craft glowing green over Holmfirth, and one of the most famous cases in the past couple of years was when an object could be seen over the Ribblehead Viaduct for several hours. I became interested in Todmorden after a strange set of coincidences led me to look at any strange reports between Jodrell Bank down in Crewe and Winter Hill in Lancashire. As I plotted reports on the map, I did realise that Todmorden crops up over and over again. So for many months now, I've been looking into any reports in that area and the triangular area between all three that could possibly help to explain some of the very strange reports people were sending in to me. It started with my husband's personal experience that happened in the 1990s, and it's kind of come full circle with today's cattle mutilation images. Let me explain the correlation of the events that keep leading me back to Todmorden. Many years ago, my husband and a number of people in my hometown of Little Hulton in the late 80s and early 90s had unexplainable experiences with lights in the sky, missing time, and a possible abduction event. Now, most people know me for the work I do with cryptid creatures here in the UK. But I discovered many years ago that the phenomenon which surrounds the creature accounts is the exact replica of what witnesses to the extraterrestrials experience. Many of these witnesses experience strange synchronicity with owls, missing time, lights, strange visitors by the bed, memories of snippets of images, quick flashes of past events, and even repeated visitations. My hometown is a typical overspill new town. Set up in the late 50s, it was on the very edge of town, and it consists of fields and farms and green belt with little clusters of housing estates along the way. In 92, 93, my husband was out in the fields about 2 a.m. with 3 of his friends. They all were in their late teens or early 20s at the time, and they lived here in Little Hulton. There's not much to do in Little Hulton when work finishes for the day, and it was even worse 30 years ago. There was no late night shops or takeaways back then. But because of the East Lancashire Road, and it's only a half a mile or a mile away, late at night, that was the only shop you could really go to back then. Most people would head that way and use the motorway garage services at night, and if they ran out of something that couldn't wait till morning, or we'd go there to meet up and find out where the night's rave would be. It was a similar thing in Salford. You can go to the garage as the crow flies and cut some of the walk off if you cross the old ancient site at Mossley Common where the henge was. And that's what they did. Back in the time, this area had an ancient grass henge, and it's one in a line of barrows that cross the north of England, going northwest to Winter Hill and northeast in the direction of Todmorden. And yeah, you've guessed it, they also head for Jodrell Bank. Each one of the people that night had a different point that the memory stopped, yet they all remember coming to at once together. For example, my husband remembers passing the Yew Tree pub, and the next conscious memory he has is of them all coming to at the same time. Around 1.5 hours later, one of the lads, who we'll call Lee, remembers getting halfway across the field, but he can't remember nothing till they all woke up. The other two remember setting off on the walk, but have no clear memory of it at all. They all agreed they did see a bright light on the walk, and they were asking each other what it could be. The next conscious memory they all have was when they came to. They were all lying flat down on the grass. They were facing up, and they were positioned head to head in a cross formation on the highest point of the barrow. They all came to and looked up at once without speaking. And there was the same huge bright light above them. Each one was dazed and confused. Sadly, one of the lads has passed away, and his friends think this incident had something to do with that. All 4 of them have had hard lives after this event, and they all still struggle with it to this day. When they came to, nobody moved or spoke for a number of minutes. The light was above them. It was blinding and bright. It then zipped quickly at high speed left, then right, then left again, and shot off in the direction of Winter Hill at an undescribable speed. Then the usual "what was that" and "how did we get here" questions started, but each one of them was confused and dazed and found it difficult to answer. They each were holding items of food and drink. Did they make it to the garage before the event but have no memory of it? Or were those items given to them by unknown hands and placed on the hill? I would imagine these are just some of the questions that have plagued them over the years. Mark, my husband, has a triangular scar on his forearm from that night, which has never gone away. They all walked home as if they were drunk. They refused to speak about the event, and it stayed that way for a number of decades. Each man having to come to terms with it on his own and fight the demons that it brought solo. They all felt a light must have come from the direction of Jodrell Bank. At that time, not many people felt that they could come forward with an event like this and be believed. One of the guys who was with my husband watches the skies at night, and to this day, he still does that. And he gave me an image that was captured above our estate. Now, they're all ordinary working class lads from working class towns in the northwest of England. Stuff like this is not supposed to happen other than in films. My husband hid all of this until around about 2005, when we'd been together then a number of years. I was running around chasing witnesses to ape-like creatures back then, and I'd speak to the witnesses and visit the area of the event. I'd map the report and look for any validation reports in the same area or close by. I asked my husband to take me to the Barrow, down near the Henge, close to my home, as many of the cryptid sightings happened around the ancient barrows and standing stones and henges, and I wanted to test the energy at these points. At this point, he'd not shared with me what had happened back in the 90s. They didn't know the connection the Barrow had to his experience. This was the first time I've ever seen him scared. And I asked him why he was so hesitant to take me, and he explained everything to me in a rush, and then promptly asked me not to talk about it again. He only gave me a brief explanation and then just refused to discuss it whenever I'd bring it up. Or if I was investigating a case with a UFO connection, he would just pretend it wasn't happening. A few years later, after watching me come to terms with my own fears connected to the creature that I saw, and I began to see him changed as he watched me speaking to witnesses, he started to open up about that night, and he started to tell me a little bit more each time. I then took all of the other lads' accounts, including Lee's. As I say, he's an avid sky watcher, and he shared with me the many incredible images he's caught in the skies above our town. So I used the skill I learned in cryptozoology to look for and find other people here who'd experienced something strange. That was the only way I could think of kind of putting their minds at rest. Sometimes being able to validate a witness's experience can be very freeing for them. So I set about asking friends and neighbours if they remembered anything from that period. Now, when I moved here in '96, I remember one of the neighbours telling me about an incident down on the fields where everyone came out to see a huge light that was hovering over the field back in, as I say, in the 80s. I didn't take too much notice at the time, to be honest. While I was asking around the town at home for anyone else who may have seen or experienced anything, my long-time neighbour mentioned the incident on the field again. He tells me one night in autumn, all of the houses were lit up by lights in the middle of the night. All the people close by went down to the fields and they watched these lights. At first, it was one light that split into three and then set off at speed towards Winter Hill. He said the next day, nobody mentioned the event to each other, and he said it was as if everyone had completely forgotten. I delved into newspaper articles, but I couldn't find anything in print anywhere. To clarify a few details, or to ask if any neighbours from the night still lived here, I messaged him again, and he told me about the three lights. He stated when he first saw the light, he was on Gibson Lane. And then he said the strangest thing. He said, "Why are you asking, Deb? Have you forgot? because you were there with me. I was completely taken aback by this comment. I know I wasn't there, as I lived in a different town until 1996. This took place 20 years before. I kept telling him it wasn't me standing with him, but he was adamant that I was there on the field watching. To be honest, it got a little bit heated. He was insistent I was with him and that I was with him walking down Gibson Lane. So I asked him where we'd been before the walk, and he couldn't tell me. He had no memory of anything before the event, but he is adamant that I was with him that night on Gibson Lane when he saw those lights. So I'm going to keep asking around and see if any of the people in the field that night remember the incident and are willing to come forward. I've looked into UFO cases close to cryptid reports. I think some areas are a huge attractant to phenomena and unexplained events, and it's something I'd like to do some more research into. I did forget to add, the night I interviewed the witness, who was convinced I was standing with him, a strange set of coincidences came into play. As I was chatting with him, I turned off my notifications on the phone and laptop, as I do when I'm speaking to any witness, so I don't get distracted. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. I could feel it vibrating away. My neighbours were seeing lights in the sky above the house, so much so, some of them rang the police, and they were told that it was a space station. It was also featured in the local newspaper, Salford Media, and I've also added a link to that in the description below. Now, here are some of the cases I've come across from that triangle that I spoke about. It's below Jedwell Bank, to be honest, around about the Crewe area, up to Todmorden on one side and Winter Hill on the other. Now, some people have suggested to me today that I start looking at the Bempton area as well and bring that into play, and that's something that I can do quite easily. I'll have a chat with Paul Sinclair and see if we have any correlating reports. One of the areas quite close to Todmorden, but would still be classed as Lancashire, but there's only a stone's throw in it, is a place called Blackstone Edge. And there's some strange reports up there of dog-headed men. And this report came in to me from a gentleman who lives in Australia, and he said, "Hi Deb, I just had to tell you about a conversation I had last night when I was talking to my younger sister, as I sent her some transcripts of your encounters and stories. I sent them a couple of weeks ago now, and they seem to have prodded her memory. My sister has always been a bit of a world traveller, and when she was in England about 40 years ago, she was talking to our grandmother, which would be our mother's mother, and our gran told her about her friend who met the wolf-headed men. Well, you could have knocked me down with a feather when she explained what gran said. At last, someone in my family who wouldn't think that I was a raving loony. They all smile when I try to talk about our subject, but I know what they're thinking. Honestly, I think there are thousands of us out there who get the same reaction from family, friends and work colleagues, and that's if you're brave enough to bring up the subject in the first place. Unfortunately, this meeting could have been 100 years ago or more, Deb, as I don't have a specific time frame. My gran was in the late 80s when she shared the account, so it could have been somewhere before World War One. My sister doesn't have any more details after so much time had passed. We came from Rochdale originally before we moved to Australia, so that's possibly the area where the encounter took place. But I wonder, as my mother said, she spent a lot of time up on Blackstone Edge where the wolf-headed man was seen, and I wonder, was she looking for her own encounter? I guess I'll never know. A UFO is seen at the White House car park, Blackstone Edge, Littleborough Lancs, on the 4th of June 2010, and the witness's name was Andrew Hope. I was sat in my car watching the sunset and admiring the view, when I thought to myself, look to the right, which would be Todmorden. So that's what I did. I looked, and this small black dot just appeared way up in the sky. Imagine seeing a fly about 10 feet away. Well, that's what it looked like. This object then proceeded to suddenly move from left to right over a large distance at great speed. It then moved up and down in a zigzag pattern. This lasted for a couple of minutes and then it moved off and out of sight slowly. I sat in my car amazed. I had a great feeling of unrealness, almost a dreamlike state. My logical brain said it was a bird, combined with an optical illusion caused by atmospheric conditions. After a few minutes passed, I looked right again, and it just reappeared again out of nowhere. I watched its amazing manoeuvres, and I sat thinking, is that really a bird? When it stopped dead still and just hung there. I thought, birds can't do that, can they? So I said out loud to myself, okay, do something I know a bird can't do. And it vanished instantly. Wow, I'm thinking, now a little freaked out. I looked at my dashboard's digital clock as I was watching over the time, and it said 11 minutes past 1, which was completely wrong. It was right the last time I'd looked at it. It was still light, so I looked at my mobile, and it was actually 8 p.m. I've been interested in astronomy for years, and I've seen everything one normally sees in the sky. It was not a plane, a helicopter, a bird, a satellite, a Chinese lantern, or any of the normal explanations given. It was daylight, and it was a definite physical object of an unknown type, displaying amazing moves. I'm still a little shocked, as I'm not sure why I drove up there in the first place. I just felt that I should. Maybe I was meant to be there. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm and excitement at the same time, and an even greater sense of connection. It was like some sort of communication, which I truly can't explain. This is a true account of my experience that I just needed to share. Regards, Andy. The Haslingden Shucks, 2006-2007. Twice, over a period of 2 years, one witness watched 2 phantom dogs run along this lane when she was out walking her own dogs. A black hound was seen being chased by another dog. Both dogs were slightly out of focus and were moving approximately 30 centimetres above the ground. In the same area, the Haslingden hairy man in the 1970s. And this incident took place in Haslingden, Lancashire, and the witness was only 17 at the time, but she still remembered it like it was yesterday. This is the thing I don't tell people. It's something I keep to myself. I may sound mad, but when I was 17, I lived in Haslingden. My mum and dad were out, and I was on the phone, which was usual when my parents went out. Back then, it was the old rotary phone, and you felt like you needed written permission to run up the bill. I think most people in my generation would remember doing this. I was sitting on the phone cabinet and idly looking round the room, chatting away, and I looked towards the kitchen dining room, and there was a person looking in at me through the door. He, well, it felt like a he, looked like Chewbacca from the film, I suppose. His head reached up only an inch or 2 from the top of the door frame, and he sort of poked his head and upper body round the doorway like he was checking who was on the phone. I didn't feel threatened, except of course it wasn't supposed to be there. Honestly, it seems more like he was curious to see who it was he could hear. We looked at each other for about 5 seconds, and that's a bloody long time. I don't remember anything unusual about his eyes. They weren't glowing or red or anything like that. He was a sort of mousy blonde-haired thing. Then either he left or I freaked out and looked away. My friend on the phone was panicking because I'd gone silent mid-sentence. I was too scared to tell her what I'd seen, but I made her stay on the phone till my parents come home. Dad went into the kitchen when he got in, but there was nothing there. I didn't tell any of my family, and I never saw him again. I've no idea what any of this is. How would something that big get into my house? Maybe this didn't help you at all. By the way, it was about 7:45, Top of the Pops was on, and it was sometime in October. I hadn't been drinking or experimented with drugs or anything like that. I hope this helps in some way. 9 UFOs are seen over Haslingden in 2009. A man reported seeing 9 bright orange lights flying silently in a diamond formation over Haslingden. The man was walking his dogs at around midnight on Sunday, January the 4th, 2009, when he at first noticed a bright, solid orange light flickering through the trees. He thought it was an aircraft, but it was too low. He then observed 8 more lights flying in a diamond formation over the Scoutmoor wind farm towards Rochdale. He said there was no noise and no flashing aircraft lights or anything like that. I stood with the dog, motionless, thinking, what the hell? What am I looking at? He said a couple in the nearby house also looked out of their window and watched the mysterious orbs. The man who's not named in this report wrote to the MOD, but they were unable to confirm any other reported sightings in the area. Reply from the RAF at High Wycombe said the MOD does not have any expertise or role in respect of UFO or flying saucers matters. Gary Heseltine, a retired detective constable in the British Transport Police, said there were many sightings across the Pennines over the years. There have been lots of sightings over Lancashire, especially close to the West Yorkshire border. Now, a woman breaks her ankle running away from a bear man not too far from Winter Hill. This happened at Rivington Pike in the very early 1990s. Now, myself and my friend Sally have always been close. This is not me, this is a gentleman making the report. I've known her for around 25 years now. Last September, we crossed paths after a few years and we started going out as you do sometimes. We'd just been for a meal in Manchester. And it was one Saturday afternoon, we were on our way home. I was driving and she said her ankle was hurting her badly. I asked if she was okay. And she told me she'd broken it the year before. And it was quite a bad break. And she was laid up and on crutches for a few months after the accident. She did it dancing after a few drinks one night. But then she went on to say it had been weak anyway from an accident she'd had years ago. And then went on to tell me how it happened in the first place. During the mid-90s, her and a few friends had been at clubbing and they decided to go to Rivington. They went to the Chinese garden around the back where there are 2 car parks. And after walking up the track to the top where the gardens are, they met up with some others and had a bit of a party. You know, a few drinks and someone made a little fire. Anyway, there were around 6 to 8 of them in all, a couple of cars full of people, and she really needed to go for a wee. So she walked off to a decent spot away from everybody. She had said wee, then she noticed around 20 or 30 yards away something looking at her from the bushes. It took her a few moments for her eyes to adjust, but from what she told me, she said, what she saw was huge. She said its head was big, but the body on this thing was massive. I asked her what it looked like, and she said she saw it for about 10 to 15 seconds in all. And what she could make out, it looked like a cross between a man and a bear. She described it as having the sort of body of a huge hairy man, but the head was that of a bear, and it was covered in hair, she said. At this point, once she'd gained her senses and tidied up her clothing, she turned to run. And as she turned, she twisted her ankle and let out a scream of pain and fell to the floor. At this, one of my friends, Brian, heard her and ran over and picked her up. And she was crying and in lots of pain, so they carried her back down and they took her to hospital. And she'd sprained her ankle badly and tore some ligaments. And ever since then, her ankle had been weak. So all these years later, it snapped when she broke it dancing. She said she'd never told anyone what she saw in case they took the mickey. She only said she'd been for a wee and twisted her ankle. She told me this because she knew I was open-minded to all sorts. And because I'd told her over the years about a few strange things that had happened to me. I didn't know how to tackle what to say next, and I knew she was telling the truth. You just know when you've known someone for so long, if you know what I mean. I explained about sightings of wild men across Britain and large, hairy dog-like creatures, and she'd never heard of a dogman or anything like that, but she'd heard of Bigfoot. But she didn't know what it was, apart from an ape or something. But she's not the type of girl to be interested. She'd be more interested in Big Brother. Mystery UFO sightings between Rivington Pike and Winter Hill. At 8 p.m. on a November night in 2003, a man saw an object in the sky above Rivington. The object was between the Pike and the Chinese Gardens area. The gentleman was driving across Belmont and immediately contacted Phil Catterall, chair of the Horwich-based UFO Society, describing the object as two flying circles of light, one inside the other, rotating in opposite directions. 4 weeks before, a woman in Haslingden reported seeing a similar light over Winter Hill as she opened her bedroom curtains at 6:30 a.m. Mr. Catterall said, "I've had sightings reported to me before from that area, but never like this. This is definitely different, and I intend to look into it." Now, the society has been going for about 8 years and has numerous sightings reported, especially in the Rivington area and Winter Hill. But most cases remain a mystery, said Mr. Catterall. The Winter Hill UFO and Men in Black, 1999. After spotting a UFO hovering over his field, a farmer reported the sighting to the Manchester Aerial Phenomena Investigation Team. The team reported they were followed on the investigation by an unidentified man, while the farmer was warned to stop talking about the incident by the Ministry of Agriculture, who paid him a visit, although the government agency denied they'd spoken to the farmer. A grotesque face at the window, 1958. A family moved out of their home on the outskirts of Macclesfield after seeing a white figure with a grotesque face at the window in one of the rooms. The two witnesses knocked the door from its hinges while trying to escape the strange entity. The staring man, a strange figure at the side of the road. On the 1st of October 2001 and the 1st of October 2002, a gentleman had a strange encounter with a roadside figure in Cheshire. He saw the figure on 2 separate occasions, exactly 1 year apart. Described as an entity, the witness said he saw it as he was driving down the road. He was startled when he saw the strange figure looking at him from the roadside. The figure stared into the car as he drove past. It did exactly the same thing on both occasions. The figure did not appear in the rear view mirror, and the gentleman struggled to describe the figure in great detail. Now, a UFO was seen over the Cattenfield Road, which is close to Jodrell Bank. A Cheshire resident who regularly visits Buxton witnessed an aerial phenomenon around midnight whilst driving on the A537, or as it's more commonly known, the Cat and the Fiddle Road. It's named after the pub. It's about halfway between Buxton and Macclesfield. Like many who see such things, she wishes to remain anonymous. However, she wants to share the encounter in case anyone has experienced anything similar. I kept seeing something in the corner of my eye, and I just thought it might be a bat, but it kept zipping. It had no lights, just movement, and it went so fast. I followed the road, and then I started seeing green lights, and again this zipping movement. I saw 3 red flashing lights in a triangle, and then it zipped off. I took the long way around, and I kept my eye on the sky on that point, and then I saw a very faint light ahead. I kept looking, and it was just hovering. And at one point, I stopped, and I tried to take a video, but it was dark and cloudy. When I got closer, it was like someone had turned the switch off, and it just disappeared. Once I realised I was alone in the hills, I got scared. Well, I clearly wasn't alone. I googled it when I got home, and there was a similar story in the Derbyshire Times in January of that year. On the twisting Cattenfield Road, the summits of Derbyshire give a view right across the Cheshire Plains, and that's home to Jodrell Banks and its radio telescopes. A quick internet search will tell you that this part of the world is no stranger to UFO reports. In fact, the town of Chapel and Lifirth, about 13 miles away, has one of the first ever earliest recorded UFO sightings, and that was registered in 1716. Now, there are, of course, far too many reports in these areas for me to bring them all to you today. And no doubt, there are many more yet to be revealed. How many others out there have had similar experiences or events that they cannot explain, even after years of searching for answers? As more information comes in on these cases, I will keep you updated. And I've included a link to the map in the description below if you want to have a look at that and see some of the reports for yourselves. Until next time.